This is Korea.
Hi, fellas. How are you today? Not so good, huh? Well, you know what General Sherman said about war. Oh, well, it'll only last 7 or 8 years, fellas. Of course, it could be less than that if your leaders would only listen to reason. But let's not talk about it. I'm going to play some real dreamy music for you.
Early morning fog I see visions of the things to be, the pains that are withheld for me. I realize and I can see that suicide is painless. It brings on many changes, and I can take or leave it if I please.
North Korea has become increasingly prevalent in modern-day media. Whether it's through their constant threats of nuclear warfare or the violation of human rights enacted upon its citizens, North Korea has proven itself to be a very concerning nation. Why? What forces could make such a violent yet deprived country exist? In order to understand how this Confucian nation came to be, we'll need to jump back over half a century ago. In the 1940s, the US and Russia entered the Cold War, which was a very dangerous dispute between two global superpowers with the ability to destroy the entire world's structure and stability as we know it. Though no official battles took place in the Cold War, it undoubtedly created tension between the US and communist governments, even outside of Russia. This effect can be seen in instances such as the Vietnamese War, the Chinese Revolution, and of course, the Korean War. These were all wars that America either took part in or initiated against a communist government, all of which were during or after the Red Scare. Even though the Korean War was and still is very influential, the war had lower death tolls than both the Vietnamese War and Chinese Revolution. When discussing the cause of the Korean War, it is important to keep in mind who all was involved. At the time of the Korean War, Joseph Stalin was still alive and very powerful. The president of the US was Harry Truman. The conflict started long before the Korean War, having its roots in the collapse of the Japanese Empire at the end of World War II. Korea, before its separation, was technically Japanese territories. With Japan losing World War II, Korea became its own nation again, but this didn't come without any conflict. At this point, however, about 1945, 5 years before the Korean War, conflict was much more peaceful, and both the US and Soviet Union agreed to split Korea into two different nations at the 38th parallel. Unfortunately, this peaceful form of problem-solving wasn't consistent throughout the conflict between North and South Korea. Quickly, North Korea became very politically charged. Having the Soviets running North Korea, refugees decided to retreat southward. At the time, Harry Truman had convinced the UN to take responsibility, attempting to relieve tensions between the two countries without enacting military action. This ideal of resolving conflict without enlisting militaristic support was becoming more and more popular in the mid-50s. But unlike World War II, this method was inconsistent. Within only 3 years of separation, the UN declared that South Korea was required to become an independent state. Many communists in the South opposed this, creating a situation much alike what they've experienced in the Revolutionary War, where partisan warfare, or warfare with partisans, members of an irregular military force, opposed either foreign occupation or controlling foreign nation. This partisan war made it very difficult for South Korea to properly train military, putting North Korea at an indefinite advantage. In 1949, both Kim II-'s son and Stalin agreed that it was due time that North Korea had invaded South Korea. The invasion was not concrete at first, as both Kim and Stalin were fearing the possibility of the US becoming involved, which ended up becoming a reality. 1 year later, in 1950, Stalin and Kim approved an invasion of South Korea. It has been theorized, namely in the book Mao by Zheng Chang, that Stalin had expected and even wanted the US to enter the war. South Korea was lacking both resources and military experience at the time of the invasion. Despite South Korea being much less prepared than North Korea when they invaded, they didn't surrender immediately. Even though South Korea hadn't surrendered, they were still on the brink of destruction. If South Korea expected to push back against North Korea, they required assistance. This is where the US enters the war. When South Korea was invaded, Harry Truman's initial response was to evacuate and protect US citizens. Instead of making an official declaration of war, which he saw as too time-consuming, he went to the UN. Through the UN, a declaration to halt the invasion was made, and reinforcements were sent to South Korea immediately. The Soviet Union, who was boycotting the UN at the time, was unable to protest these proposals. As the 3-year-long war began, casualties towered over the country, but military deaths were not the only income of bodies. As many people know, based off of the current day news, North Korea has become infamous for its unbearable living conditions, which have caused numerous civilian deaths yearly. During the Korean War, however, both North and South Korea committed crimes against its people. Much like the Red Scare in the US, if you were suspected of being a communist, or in South Korea's case, a leftist sympathizer, you would be ordered to be killed by the government. This ideal that sympathizers were enemies who have committed treasonous crimes are thoughts that create such incidents as the Bodo League massacre, which killed anywhere from 100,000 to 1,200,000 civilians. This led to a speculated 1 million civilian deaths inside of South Korea. North Korea had about 400,000 less, at 600,000 civilian deaths, which is quite interesting. The massacre in South Korea, though enacted by the president, was heavily protested by Allied forces, mainly Britain, even going as far as to save and protect citizens accused of being a communist sympathizer, demonstrating that it was incorrect to capitally punish citizens simply due to differing ideals. North Korea had a similar instance at the beginning of the war, killing South Korean persons with any form of education, whether that be religious or academic, as they were seen as possible threats to the North Korean government, continuing the tradition of communist governments killing educated citizens with opposing opinions. Though North Korea didn't have as devastating of killings enacted on their citizens, they were unreasonably cruel to South Korean citizens, infiltrating refugee camps through guerrilla warfare, asking for assistance from the UN camps when they would later open fire, killing the refugees. This caused unfortunate circumstances where the US, who could easily be seen as the evil force in this war, would shoot up civilians and refugees on the battlefield when they would be seen approaching refugee camps. Meaning, if they truly were surrendering, the soldiers would have killed a helpless citizen asking for help. But if not shot, they could have been North Korean soldiers with the intent to kill everybody at the refugee camp. These shoot or be shot ideals led to events such as the No Gun Ri massacre, where about 250 to 300 refugees were killed over a 3-day period. This unlawful event almost went under most people's head, until 1999, where the Associated Press released an article containing survivor reports based on the incident, where it was revealed that there were orders from the US to destroy such refugee camps due to the fact that North Korean infantry could be hiding in such. Though it is true that America never should have done such things, it is also true that North Korea had been committing war crimes by sending soldiers into refugee camps and killing civilians through the same method. The Korean War, taking place from 1950 to 1953, it was most heated during 1950 and 1951. Several battles took place after 1951, but the amount of territory exchanged was little to none. As the time went on and the amount of bodies increased, it became clear that the only true way to make North and South Korea stable again was to create an armistice, which began in July of 1951. As time continued, the citizens, as well as the generals, became more and more displeased with the situation. The Armistice, unlike what has been seen with other instances, like World War I, where the Armistice was quickly created, the Korean Armistice was slowly constructed through seemingly random meetings, taking over 2 years of war to finalize. On the 27th of July in 1953, hope emerged. An armistice was signed by both North and South Korea, putting an end to this bloody mess of a stalemate, even though no peace treaty was signed. As many Americans, even myself, believe, North Korea had lost the war and South Korea had won, but this couldn't be farther from the truth. The Korean War had no winner. Though it's true that South Korea remained separate and never became a communist state, the tensions have shown to be everlasting, with nuclear threats being made by North Korea in the present day. It's hard to see this war as a winnable event. With a combined death toll of citizen and military of about 2,862,000, the Korean War will forever go down as a devastating and meaningless loss of life.